Hello and welcome to CRE Radio and TV Live. This is our inaugural show in which we're going to be talking about incentives. Let me tell you, before we get on to that, let me tell you a little bit about what it is that we're doing here. This is a live show, and as such, you as audience members can raise your hand. If you've joined here, you can see something where you can request to participate in the show, in which case I can bring you in, and your video and audio will be shared on the show with all of the audience members, which is kind of a cool feature, and which something that I was really looking forward to doing. If you want to participate in the show, if you're an audience member and you don't want to participate, there's nothing special that you need to do. You can ask questions should be on the right side of your screen, should be a chat room where you can ask questions or give comments, and if we can get to you, we'll include that as part of the show. We don't have a definite time period on the show. We want to keep it to about an hour. This show is being recorded, so if you don't want to be on the show, don't raise your hand. Otherwise, you will be on the show. As a matter of fact, one of our guests does not want to be on the video. No, and it's not you, Roman. It's Mike McWilliams. But I don't want to mention any names, but you'll know that when you see the screen without him on it. One of the other things is that when we're done with this will be recorded. You will receive an email notifying you that this is a recorded show and that you will be able to watch it, download it. We will also edit it so that there'll be an audio version, and we would appreciate it if you feel it's worthwhile to share it with all of your friends and family members and anyone else who might be interested in the topic of the show, which is commercial real estate government incentives. And we'll get a little bit more into that. Now, there goes Linda, the broker list. Linda has shown up. Mike should be on the show too. I agree with you, Linda. So I'm not going to read all of that. So we've got about 16 people now on the show. And before we go any further, so no matter what my intro video is, I'm going to bear with me. It didn't get on, so I am going to try to switch to the intro video. It was supposed to happen. This is the kind of stuff, if we've got mistakes, trust me, it's a first show, that's what's going to happen. So I am going to switch right now. I'm going to screen share and show you my intro video. Whoops, nope, that's not the intro video. Let me go back and I will switch. Okay, so we've got all kinds of funny things going on. So now you'll see that, but now you should see this. I hope you see it. Now, did you guys see that?
We saw it.
Okay. Well, now you can see why I wanted to show it so much. So let's now get into what whoops. Okay, that's why you don't do it that way. I am going to switch back and no longer screen share. And okay, now we're back to the regular show. So now we've seen the highly unprofessional version of the television show. So one of the things, the topic of the show is government incentives, and let's get right back into this. We're going to be talking about tax incentives, EB-5 visas, affordable housing financing, SBA financing, among others, and what we're going to talk about is what these incentives are, how to find them, and how to make the best use of them as it may relate to commercial real estate. My guests are Roman Petra. Roman is an attorney with Broad and Cassell. Did I pronounce that correctly, Roman?
Yes, Howard, you did.
Okay. And he's also a co-founder of Rain ID, that's spelled R-E-I-N-I-D. My other guest is Mike McWilliams, also a co-founder of Rain ID, and the tech guy, or one of the tech guys, is part of that. And we have another guest who's joined Roman, who's also on his video. David, would you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name is David Leon, and I'm a partner here at Broad and Cassell in our tax credit department and incentive department.
Okay, so we better make this look good, otherwise Roman's going to look very bad. Okay, everybody, the bios can be found on our website, the webpage on CRE TV or CRE Radio. And why don't we just get right into the show, since, of course, I started out with things that didn't go right, including the intro. So why don't we do this, gentlemen? Why don't we have you explain, well, I've already done that, how you can participate. Let's talk about what real property incentives are generally. Do you want to start with that, Roman?
That's fine. So basically in our practice area, which is at Broad and Cassell, I've been here now for 10 years. Most of our clients who do transactions, and typically they're developers, they look for projects that have economic incentives tied to them. So basically just breaking down money tied to a location, where what they're looking for is identifying where those sites are and seeing how that they can utilize the funds and when they build their projects. So basically you have different programs that are available, and what you do basically is identify what value you can extract from those programs, usually monetary. So,
okay, so this is something that you kind of define it by geographic area, which is a lot of what Rain ID is about. But these incentives, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of these incentives generally? And Mike and David, you can hop in at any time.
So this is David, and there is a myriad of incentives available. There are tax credits, which may be, for example, an affordable housing tax credit that's tied to housing that allows a owner of that credit to offset their taxes dollar for dollar. You have what's called a new market tax credit, which doesn't matter what the function of the facility is as much as the geographic region. So, for example, if I'm in a what's called a highly distressed census tract or area, then I may be eligible for a 39% tax credit simply by locating my business in that area. So it's tied to the geography of the business or the real estate. It doesn't matter what you're actually doing there, aside from some sin businesses, but that's a dollar for dollar reduction of taxes for this credit available if you're in the right area. Something that Rain ID will show you in 2 minutes, which areas would qualify or not qualify for that. There are other incentives tied to the real estate. One that you mentioned was EB5 financing, which is basically if the property is located in certain zones, it will be attractive for foreign investors to make an investment in that business at that location, and for making that investment, they can actually receive a green card. So that's an example where it's you're not getting a credit, you're getting a green card, and that obviously is an incentive for foreign investors to come into America and invest dollars geographically in certain regions. So there's 3 examples off the bat that you can quickly look and say, if I'm in the right location, I may get a credit, and that may help me either close my deal or attract investment to this area and help that transaction close and give value to it.
Okay. Now, that's a great explanation. We're going to go into more detail with regard to the EB5 visas. you've been hearing a lot about the EB-5 visas, and we'll talk about some examples of that. But the visas are just one of the many incentives. And when I started preparing for this show with David, not David, sorry David, you're brand new here, Roman and Mike, they made it very clear to me that there are quite a few incentives. And I'm going to up front say that, and you'll realize this as we go along with all these incentives, any broker who is not familiar with the incentives of the property that they're representing, if they're a listing broker or if they're a tenant rep, if they're not aware of all of these incentives that might be available in a region or available to their client, I think it's malpractice. And I've gone 100% on this with David. Now, why are these valuable, and to whom are they valuable to?
Well, sure. Ron, you want to take that one? Or?
Well, there's multiple people that and David, you can check on this one. There's multiple people that are in the space that you have to look at and say, who's it valuable to? So generally, you look at your end user so that you define exactly who ultimately is your beneficiary of the credits or the incentive financing. We're talking about EB-5, and say these are the folks that can utilize it. So that's the primary beneficiaries. But more importantly, when we first set out to create the REIN ID product, we realized that the most obvious beneficiary of these incentives are actually the landowners. Because at the end of the day, you basically have landowners who have land, and they don't realize that there is tangible or intangible value tied to land. It's not obvious. So ultimately, what we wanted to do was basically show the United States, so certain areas of the United States, and show where the incentives are. So if I'm a landowner and I'm looking to sell, then not only do I know typically what value lies to it as a person says, here are the amenities tied to it, here's what the typical value is, but here are some other underlying values that you might not be aware of. And incidentally, this value benefits a different group of folks that you might not be thinking of. So there's money that's tied to the land that's just not obvious.
Well, a good example of that, I've got an 18-acre farm located just outside Orlando, okay? And I can tell you that I know that farm qualifies as a high-distressed new market tax credit area. I know it qualifies for EB-5 investment. I know that geographically where it's located at, it would not probably serve as a good affordable housing, given the current scoring criteria for affordable housing. It would make a good market rate housing area to bring in either some EB-5, and it would meet CRA need, depending upon the investment that was done there. And that's another thing we should talk about at some point, is where banks have CRAs, that's also on the REIN ID website, that really would tell you, okay, here's where, if I go get a lender, the other side of this is, who do I attract to loan to the deal? They have CRA need, here's the CRA area, here are the banks in the area, there's my short list of people to call to make a loan to my transaction or make an investment in my transaction.
Now, are these incentives strictly federal, or are there state and local incentives?
They're across the board. There are federal incentives. For example, a lot of the tax credits we'll talk about, whether it be solar, LIHTC, NMDC, historic credits is another one that's very valuable. Those are all federal. A lot of times the states will piggyback the federal program and say, if you qualify for example, a federal new market credit, we'll also give you the state new market, or federal historic. We have a state historic in certain jurisdictions. There are also local incentives. For example, very often in Florida, we can get an impact fee waiver for using certain types of housing or certain types of developments on a piece of property. So it's at all three levels that may exist.
And to keep in mind, for example, on the impact fee waivers, that those can be substantial in itself. Some
Absolutely.
of them, so you be mindful of all the areas you can find incentives at every level of government, possibly.
Are there qualifications for some of these incentives or all of them? I mean, can anybody qualify, or
There are qualifications, and it depends on the program that you're in.
Correct.
And some of them are qualifications on maybe who or what can qualify, potentially, depending upon the credit. There's qualifications on the type of use of property that would qualify. There's certainly qualifications on the geographic location of the property, which is part of the reason for this show, right? Is location, location, location. Along with that, incentive for that location. So there are location guidelines for that, and then uses. You know?
Yeah, and for example, if we just look at one incentive that we can touch on, for example, is the new market tax credit, which is actually one of the reasons why we got into this mapping system, and I think that was maybe about 6 or 7 years ago. It dawned on me that new markets is a flourishing area. It was an area that I came from St. Louis when I moved to Orlando, and we were doing a lot of transactions in new markets, and I realized that nobody was mapping it out, so that I could look at a map and say, where's it tie into properties are for sale. That was my eureka moment, saying, well, if I'm a landowner, I'd want to know that this property is eligible for new markets. And more importantly, if I'm a broker, I'd want to say, this site is eligible for new market tax credit financing. And for new markets, the criteria is just, it's typically used for commercial development. And let's start off with basically what you can't use it for. There is a litany. It says basically a sin business. And what a sin business is a massage parlor, hot tub, suntan, country club, gaming, race car, racetrack, an intangible and certain farm. But if you don't qualify, if you don't fall within those, then you can use it for commercial, you can use it for mixed use, community centers, education facilities, health-related facilities, hotel and hospitality, and even for residential, but that becomes a little more tricky.
Well, yeah, because it has to be a commercial business, and these are commercial realtors that we're talking about today, which is important for them. Something that's interesting, this happens to us all the time. I was in a meeting last Thursday with a client, and they are about to enter a commercial lease, or want to enter a commercial lease for 20,000 square feet to put a lab in, a research lab. And I asked them, well, have you considered the new market credit yet? And they didn't know what that was. And so this would be about an $8 million investment into this particular facility. And for that, they can generate a 39% tax credit as long as they're located in the right area. So we went and checked the map, and it turned out they were located in a new market credit area. So he said, okay, before you sign your lease out, let's just check a few boxes and make sure that we're going to style this to qualify for the credit. So there's basically, take 40% of $8 million, $3 million bucks sitting on the table available that would have gone unused had someone not known this is where you should be at. Conversely, if it didn't qualify for an NTC credit, but a place 4 doors down or across the street may have qualified, and this has actually happened before. The northeast corner didn't qualify, the southwest corner did. If you would have located across the street literally, you would have gotten a 39-cent tax credit per dollar of investment in that site had you known that it qualified. So it would have been an opportunity for someone to come in and say, well, that didn't qualify, but over here, this site did qualify. Why don't you lease from over here instead? So knowing it at a very minimum, to your point, at least checking yourself on commercial developments or commercial sales, am I in or out of an NTC area, will demonstrate to your client, buyer or seller, hey, this person brings something to the table. I hadn't heard about that before. And 2, maybe actually get you the sale that you need.
Yeah, I think that is one of the key elements, particularly for various players in the real estate market, for brokers in particular. How does this relate to them? How do the real estate brokers take advantage of this kind of information? And to me, I think one of the ways is real obvious. I don't think most of the brokers are aware of this information. So if you're looking for a listing and you walk into the interview armed with this information, it seems to me that you've got a leg up on other brokers. How else is this of benefit to brokers?
Well, so my point of view, the way you can look at it is this way. If I can look at a map and I can geographically identify areas that have incentives, and it'd be your new markets, I'd want to look at it. And then if I have potential sellers there, I would definitely identify that message to them and saying, your site is eligible for new markets. Now, again, as long as I'm not a sin business, as long as I might have other qualifying businesses that could use the money, it's something that the seller should know about. So that's one group. And again, you're educating them, so it builds a relationship also. So it's something new. They probably never heard about it. Now they know about it, and they maybe can extract more value out of their property. But also, for example, now if I'm looking to buy a property, I would be looking for example, somebody who's coming to a specific area. I'd be looking specifically for areas that are in a new market designated areas. So qualified census tracts.
Or if you don't know about it as a broker, your buyer may not realize that site qualifies. Your buyer, of course, has to say, I've got to pay for this somehow. Let me get money figured out, and I'll put an offer on it. That's a great time for a broker to say, by the way, as you figure out your sources and uses here, have you considered NMTC? That may be available to you. And I will tell you, I don't mind being the hero in the room as the attorney with the client, making my client more money. But there's no reason the broker up front couldn't have been the hero as well on the front side of that. It steals my thunder, but that's okay.
Well, a lot of buyers, I would imagine, are not even aware that these incentives are available.
Yeah.
And I mean, this goes back to one of my earlier comments. If you're a broker, and whether you're representing the buyer or the seller, if you're not aware of these, you are committing malpractice. If you leave money on the table that is a benefit to your client, you should be shot. Well, I don't want to go that far, but boy, I wouldn't want to hire you again.
Yeah, and when David and I, so when we first put it out there, and as I mentioned before, showing the mapping system and saying here are the areas that qualify for new markets, which are census tracts. The one thing we want to do is tie it intimately with properties that are selling, because at the end of the day, I just want to make sure that folks understood my property has value that I typically wouldn't see or recognize otherwise. So now that's important.
Sure. Now, before I go any further, I noticed that there's at least one person who had raised their hand to come into the show, and I really want people to participate in the show. So if you've registered for the show using a gmail.com account, you can do so. On the right-hand side, you will see something that says, I'd like to speak, or something to that effect. Please do that, but before you do, in the chat room, please identify yourself, what your first and last name is, and what it is that you'd like to talk about, so that I can prioritize who's going to be involved and who can participate. Let's now jump to a very hot topic, and that's EB-5 visas. Why don't we talk about what they are and what the qualifications are?
So EB-5, which stands for Employment-Based Immigration, there are 5 preference categories. You have EB-1, EB-2, EB-3, EB-4, and then you have EB-5. EB-5 is the one that 7 years ago somebody came to me and was asking me to do a transaction or put together an application for new market tax credits, and mentioned to me that they wanted to incorporate the EB-5 concept into my application. And I said, golly gee whiz, never heard of it 7 years ago. And I said, is this something that's very unusual? And I became somewhat familiar with it. It was a interesting endeavor that we pursued. And then I left it, and then it popped up, percolated again, where I would hear EB-5. Now today, most developers that we come across will say, I want to know about EB-5, or I'm using EB-5. And I happen to have a client that specifically only does deals with EB-5 financing.
Okay, so let's get back to the question. You sound like a lawyer, Roman. Good.
Trying.
Except that you didn't answer my question with another question. So let me get back to the question at hand, which is, so we know that EB-5 has to do with immigration visas.
Yes.
Now, why would a developer, a syndicator, an owner of property have any interest in financing, and this is all about financing the property, why would they be interested in the EB-5 process?
Well, as you well know, you can always go out and get either debt or equity for a property, right? And there's a cost for that. So all this is about what's my financing stack look like, and what cost am I paying for that across the board, and what's available. What is unique about the EB-5 is generally the return to the investor is the green card. And so that's not something that we pay for, that's from the federal government. So I'm able to use a federal government asset that costs me nothing to give the return to the investor, which means my interest rate could be, depending upon how I structured my transaction and how involved I was in the investment raise, my interest rate, my cost of dollars could be very small on that EB-5 component. That's a good thing to have. The second item that comes up is it's possible to structure EB-5 within an equity realm or a mezz financing structure. So to the extent I got a public financing gap beyond the first mortgage, if they got an 80% LTV or the 120 DSCs, what have you, I can bring in the subordinate financing or potential equity, depending on how to structure it, into the transaction and fill that gap with the EB-5 funds. So it's certainly advantageous to add into a transaction. There's, as everything else, there's a lot more complications that can bring in a transaction. There are, and we'll get into this, I believe, some EB-5 regional centers, the middleman between me, developer, and the investor in South America or wherever. And that middleman wants a fee, right?
Well, sure, but we'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about the players involved. What are the qualifications? So you've got someone from, for lack of a better description, Korea or China. They want to come to the United States and they want to have a visa to the United States. Basically, this is a process that they can buy a visa, in essence. I know that's probably not the best way to describe it, but that's basically what it is.
Vernacular. They are buying a visa by investing into the U.S. That's okay.
Yeah, what are the qualifications? What do they need to be able to do? And what are the things that they need to be able to know in order to get that visa?
So just for the foreign investor, what they need to know is that the EB-5 program was specifically designed for either job creation or job preservation. So you can have a existing business that needs to have an influx of capital, or you have a new business, or you have a project, or you have something that needs capital. And basically what you're doing is you're creating 10 jobs for a certain amount of money, which, for example, if you're in a certain area, it could be $1 million. And if you're in another area, it could be $500,000. And of course, if you are an investor, you're going to choose to put in the $500,000. And it's almost to the point where it's, I think, 90%, and that's what I last heard, 90-some% of most capital is delivered to those areas that could qualify just for the $500,000 investment, which, just so that we clearly identify that area, it's called a TEA area, which stands for Targeted Employment Area.
Great. We actually have Lou Lolio, I believe, who would like to ask a question. And Lou, I think, is that you who wants to come in? Why don't we bring you in? All right, you'll be in any moment now, Lou, and you're going to be on screen. I hope. You have a camera? You do need a webcam to be on camera. There we go. Hold it. Is there someone there? No. Let Invite as a speaker. Let's try it again. That's my fault. New equipment. I don't know what I'm doing. He should be joining us any moment now. And I had to do the dun 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 dun. And he backed out. I guess he didn't want to be part of it. Well, Lou, I'll tell you what. I'll ask your question for you, which you wrote in. This is your question. Oh, we got a bunch of questions here. Mike McWilliams, hand is raised. Mike, I don't need you to raise your hand. You can talk.
No, I was just bringing Lou into the.
All right, but no,
Yep.
Leave your stuff out right now. Let's answer Lou's question. He's a commercial broker in California. He says that he's hearing that the EB-5 program is set to sunset at the end of 2015. Is this true, and are there any extensions proposed? Good question.
So there has been always an issue with the continuation of EB-5 program, whether they're going to continue it. As I understand at this point, it's still well favored and it should continue. So it does create jobs and it has preserved jobs. So right now there's a favorable inclination, but it's not to say that you won't hear rumors in Congress where they re-examine the program and see any abuses that there might be. And of course, we all know about the abuses. They do receive headline news.
And on that point, it's not uncommon for some of these incentives to sunset annually. In fact, the low-income housing tax credit used to sunset every year up until I think 95 or so, when it was made permanent in the code. So we would expect this to continue, the EB-5 program to continue, even though it may be on an annual sunset at this point in time.
And even for that matter, the New Market Tax Credit program.
Absolutely. The New Market is another one that is set to sunset annually right now, and each year it gets renewed. Of course, all this may change as Congress changes, but right now we expect that to be the case.
Let's address the issue. Now, this is geographic in nature, but if someone wants to get that visa, they need to know where they can make their investments. They might have to come up with $500,000 or $1 million. How does this relate to commercial real estate? Because this is all about job creation. So how does this relate to commercial real estate? And Roman, I'm going to remind you a little bit of that article in the Wall Street Journal that you and I were passing back and forth earlier today, because that's a perfect example.
Correct. So that was a great article, and it was talking about the fact that it was written in the Wall Street Journal. I think it was either in December of 2014 or the beginning of this year. I think it was last year in December, and it spoke about the Related Group and Lennar, and that what they're doing is they're looking for sites that would qualify for EB-5 financing. Now, if you keep in mind, some of the sites with EB-5 do not qualify as a TEA, where what I said in the beginning was that every area qualifies for an EB-5 investment. But the difference is if I'm in a TEA area, then I go from $1 million investment down to $500,000 investment. So what typically happens is a developer wants to find an area that qualifies as a TEA. Now, you can actually have an area that is qualified as a TEA. Or what you could do is, and if Mike has a map, we could show it, we can also gerrymander sites, meaning I can gerrymander certain areas, and I can bring them together in order to qualify a location for a TEA designation.
Well, that article in the Wall Street Journal was talked about a number of different developments, one in San Francisco with Forest City Ratner, another was the Hudson Yards in New York.
Correct.
I forgot what the exact amount was, but it was a fairly substantial investment from EB-5 investors in the Hudson Yards. And one of the things that caught my attention in the article was they were talking about this can be temporary jobs. It doesn't have to be permanent jobs.
Correct. Well, so as I recall, if I look at the Hudson Yard project, Hudson Shipyard project. That project does not qualify as a TEA area, as I recall. Looking at the map, but I don't have the map in front of me. So what happened was, with the EB-5 program, the first idea was create 10 jobs for my investment. We're talking about initially direct jobs. But what happens is, if I run my money through an EB-5 regional center, which are extremely important, now I move from having to focus on direct jobs to I can also now count indirect jobs and also tertiary jobs that come from the money investment. So that's a sizable gain for an investor.
Including the jobs created during construction. And that is, I think the point is, if I have construction jobs that are created, that there's a formula that we can use to get to that 10 number, the all-important number of jobs being created by our temporary jobs during construction and the tertiary jobs as well. So
so the construction job would be the temporary job,
correct.
And that would be a direct job that would be created. And I'm not going to go into the details of the various complications that may be involved in the Hudson Yards and the various financing that they have and will be going through. But as Roman had indicated, we're also talking about the secondary and tertiary jobs, and that might also include the retail salespeople?
Correct. So let's look at this. Now, about 3 years ago, the economists got together and they said, there's two models. Again, you can say direct job, indirect job, and induced jobs. But then the economists talked to USCIS and said, hey, we can create jobs through construction. It's called the expenditure model. And this is where you use a multiplier. And what really you're looking at is what you tying your investments into the hard construction costs. And you're running a calculation. You're saying, we know that so many indirect and induced jobs are going to be generated. And ultimately, what you realize is in the construction period, it's usually construction period is shorter than 2 years, generally speaking, for a project. And so what's one of the issues that raised issues for some folks saying, well, I've got construction that's going to go vertical, and I'm supposed to generate 10 jobs, permanent jobs. But in reality, when I have a completed project, we will have jobs that will be sustainable. So that's when the expenditure model came to play, and that's what most developers, sophisticated developers now use in order to qualify their project for EB-5 financing.
Let me give you an example, the picture here. You hear a lot about repurposing of property. You got an old, haggard, closed down shopping mall somewhere. And of course, one of the first things, if I was looking to repurpose, I would be looking to see what kind of incentives and how to finance the property. One of the things that I would look at is this, if I want to build if I want to tear down the shopping center, build a different shopping center with a different design, which is not unusual in today's date, because in the early 2000s they were building shopping centers galore with incredibly stupid designs. So now you might just level the whole thing, have a smart design. It's going to create jobs, and that might, if it's in the correct geographic area, create enough jobs to qualify for an EB-5 visa, so then you can start looking to your investors, your EB-5 investors.
And one important point on that, by the way, is generally our clients, when we've used EB-5 in our financings, generally they rely on a regional center to go out and aggregate those investors, create the pool. You know, my developer client doesn't want to be eyeball deep in red tape trying to figure out where they can get an investor from and qualify them for passage into America. So there's crowd at these EB-5 centers. They will go out, they'll vet the investors, they'll run the traps through the federal government on the green card side of it, pull the money together, and then make loans into transactions. So it helps a couple things. One, less work for my client. Two, the time frames involved can be shortened because they've already got an investor pool ready to go to some degree. The trade-off, of course, is the cost. The EB-5 center wants to have some remuneration for all of that work.
Well, let's talk about the cost. And right after we get done answering that question, I want to try to bring in Lou, who is really trying to get onto the show, and I think that would be a great idea. So what is it? Someone else asked the same question. For, let's say you have a foreign investor who comes in, brings in $1 million, they qualify under EB-5. What does that money cost to the developer?
Generally, the investor itself is going to get somewhere between 0 to 1% on their money plus a green card.
That's why you want it.
Exactly. The trick is, though, is the EB-5 regional center that I've seen them come out maybe as high as 8% on their money and take that spread. And their analysis is, the reason is, well, one, I'm going to take a subordinate position, a mezz financing. I'm cheaper than straight mezz, and I did all the work to bring this together. So I would expect, depending on what you negotiate with your regional center, somewhere between the 4 and the 8%. Depends on how well you know them, the project you're doing, how easy it is to get the capital raised. For example, certain projects that people work on are very desirable for the foreign investors. One thing they look for is there government involvement or exempt bonds. For a foreigner investor in this program, if they see the government has somehow been involved in the transaction, they, in their mind, think, oh, it's been vetted. This is a much safer investment for Nvidia than, say, something without a government exempt bond on it or some government overlay. I recently used EB-5 funds and new market credits to develop a shrimp fund down in South Florida, and we had to do some things to create a research lab and what had to qualify for the program. But the hot buttons we hit were this has USDA overlays to our research development to develop a better way to grow shrimp. And that's what attracted the investors in. That particular developer, who was originally from South Africa, had a pool of investors he brought with him. That money cost him 0.5% for that money.
Well, it's good money. Lou, I apologize. We keep on trying to bring you in, and for some reason, it's just not happening. After the show, if you can, please get a hold of me. I'd like to know what your experience has been trying to get in so that we can figure out what the problem is. Obviously, in our test shows beforehand, it will work fine. It goes without saying. It always does, until you do the real thing. So let's now talk a little bit about who the players are. Who are the players? And if you're interested in learning about these incentives, who are the players that you have to be working with?
So, again, your entrees, who are you, probably most important, correct? I mean, who am I coming into the circle, the EB-5 environment? So the players are consultants who do the business plan writing, they do the fund administration. Of course, you have attorneys, and there are multiple attorneys involved in this sort of transaction. You have your immigration attorney, which we engage with. You have your securities attorneys. You also have, for example, David and I, we generally represent developers, so that's where we fit in. And then you also have economists. They're the ones who say... So
wait a second. Is this a money-making business for the lawyers?
Well, yeah. we bring a lot of value to the table, hopefully, so it's okay.
Okay, Roman, I'm sorry. Go ahead. As a lawyer, I have to ask that question.
Then you have the economists who are the vital components of this whole thing, who basically look at and say, here are the jobs being created. And then you have the regional center operators who are extremely important in this whole thing. You have your marketing agents, and then ultimately the most important is who's your end user, which in our cases is going to be the bar. Well, it is a bar, but I'm talking about the developer.
One thing I can point out, by the way, this EB-5 has been around since 1990.
That's right.
So it's 25 years ago. It's only taken off in the last couple of years as people have caught on to what actually works or doesn't work here. And there are, as this show itself will say, there's a lot of interest. There's a lot of people who all say, oh yeah, I know EB-5. There's very few who've actually done it. I've had clients spend a lot of time and money with groups that say, I can go raise investors for you and never go anywhere. So watch out for the smoke that's out there. Try and find someone who's actually been through the process. The questions to ask of an EB-5 center is, do you have investors lined up? Actually, first and foremost, have you done this before?
Yes.
Do you have investors lined up? What's your process and what's your time frame? And if you have done it before, how do you disperse funds? Because what happens is that the feds require at one time all the money to be pulled and in place before, and all the green cards would be approved before the first dollar could come out of the fund. That's a long time to wait. It's since changed, become more flexible, where the EB-5 Center is allowed to release funds after the first green card has been approved. That's the EB-5 Center my client wants to do business with, because I'm getting money sooner, not later.
And it just
Let's talk about these regional centers a second, because I've heard you talk about that. What is their involvement in these regional centers? Are these government controlled, or are they more like escrow services, or what?
they're private businesses. Now, what David said was extremely important. There are, and I think as of yesterday, we looked up, there are like 600 plus regional centers. And in reality, that I understand, what I've seen is that there really have been only a handful of ones that have done a lot of these type of deals. So typically when I have a client who comes to me, and it could be a developer and even, for example, a broker comes to me, the first thing I will say, just like David pointed out, is, do you know about this EB-5 regional center? Have they done deals? Are they familiar with it? What, not only David talked about the fact of deploying capital, but then I'm also interested in figuring out, do they have access to the different countries? Because the one point that, back to what David was saying, is that where everybody makes money, the other group that makes money in this system is that you've got the foreign brokers who are then tying in the actual investors into this entire process. So the regional center here makes money, but also you got to keep mindful of the fact you've got people over.
But what does the regional center do? I mean, what's their involvement? Do they just, we're a regional center? I mean, they must be doing something.
What they do, go ahead, Ron.
No, absolutely.
Well, they have 2 or 3 important roles. They will generally, one, scrub your development and make sure it qualifies for EB-5 treatment. Okay, and so there's a myriad of rules that have to be followed to make sure you meet the employment, as you know, the number of jobs you need to have, the T location of that. The second thing they will do is work with the federal government to obtain the green card.
Yeah.
So that they're the ones that will interface between the foreign investor and the federal government to obtain the green card for the investment. The last thing they do, or maybe the first thing they do, is go find that foreign investors. And they can either do that directly with contacts, or, as you can imagine, there's now been foreign brokers who have popped up, and their sole goal in life is to go gather EB-5 investors and introduce them to an EB-5 fund here locally to bring money into the States.
And also keep in mind that the EB-5 Regional Center also plays an extremely important role, something that's not obvious, but for example, to the foreign investors, saying here are the players that you should be talking to, for example, an immigration attorney, and also saying relocation assistance. One of the benefits of using a regional center is that I don't have to be particularly tied to the location where I'm investing. So I can be anywhere, and the EB-5 regional centers work with foreign investors, able to identify services for that, and also they are able to assist in job placement, education, and also businesses like are looking for employment. So the EB-5 regional centers play a lot of roles, like David had pointed out, just the more obvious ones, but there are other benefits that they play. Mr. Raymond.
Linda, I know that you're there, Linda. So if you would you try to, or at least ask to be included in the show as a presenter, so that I can see perhaps if the problem is on our end or it might have been on Lou's end. I'm a little disappointed that we're unable to bring him in. Mark asked the question, what realistically is the time frame to receive complete financing on a new commercial development which employs EB-5 financing in a targeted employment area? This sounds very drawn out and quite arduous.
That's a good observation, and it absolutely can be. Again, this is all of the discussion about EB5. When clients come to me and say, "Oh, I'm going to drop EB5 in this and plug the gap," I stop the phone call for a second and say, "Well, hold on, let's back up. Do you have your investors already? Do you have an EB5 center lined up? How are you going to bring the money into the deal?" And they just think there's a switch out there. You can go to the bank and, "Oh, give me EB5 and I'll be closed in a week." It's not going to happen. It can take 6 months easily, would be a time frame to go from start to finish on an EB5 transaction. And the process can be quite arduous, to Mark's point, and drawn out. That's why it's so important to use an EB5 center, what's been through this before, unless you have your own contacts or own fund out of the U.S. to bring the money here.
Hey, by the way, everybody say hello to Linda at the broker list. And by the way, at the end of the show, we're going to have a pretty big announcement that involves Rain ID and the broker list. So Linda was able to come in. So now, Lou, if you're still there, I'm going to have to figure out why you had so much problems trying to get in, and so that I can help make it easier for you. Say hello, Linda.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Linda.
I have so many questions, I can't stand it.
Well, go ahead and ask a question.
Well, I go along with Mark. It just sounds like it's just almost impossible to do this, and the number one thing that brokers don't want is any deal to be slow. And they don't want it to stop a deal or slow a deal down to make their commission. So I can see our brokers running for the hills saying, "This is crazy, we don't want any part of it."
That's a good point. Generally, when we've seen the EB5 coming into the transaction, it's property we've already purchased and are moving forward on, and we're layering in EB5 within our closing process. So we'll acquire the property up front and then layer in EB5 as we do our major development moving forward. We would not necessarily use EB5 for the underlying acquisition. But it's an excellent point you make. I don't think anyone should be running around saying, "Hey, go get EB5 funds to close this deal today," because that's not going to be a day or two for that. Now, as you know, a lot of the sales you do in commercial realty in particular, that's a very long process where you got someone on the hook for months or maybe even a year of going through and bringing things together, what have you. At that point, EB5 may make some sense, and it's worthwhile to understand the program. And I think most importantly is, if a buyer says to you, "I want to use EB5 to buy," you might want to head for the hills as the broker, or at least ask the question, say, "Well, which center are you using? Are your funds lined up?" Because that should tell you immediately, this may not be closing tomorrow for lunch. This might be a long process here.
But I think the bigger, and this is the change of psychology. One of the things what we're trying to do, which was one of the reasons why we created the Rain ID product, is I'm in commercial real estate more than residential. It takes a lot of time to do stuff. I mean, it takes a lot of time to get the listing, then procure the buyer. But keep in mind, what I would be doing at this point is that I would be searching for properties that are within certain areas, in the T areas. And if I know that I have a property in a T area, then I would, for example, talk to the regional centers. You'd be surprised, again, as we talk about all the services that regional centers provide, the regional centers also promote and understand what investors are looking for, and if they know of businesses that are looking to come in certain areas. So I think the part of it is tedious, complicated, but there's also some diligence where a broker can become more mindful of, if I'm in these areas, I should be able to identify it. Now, how do I be proactive on that listing? And maybe I can find a buyer that I didn't know was there. So,
or perhaps the broker may develop a relationship with an EB5 center and bring that to the table that way, if that's allowed or not.
And think about this. If you
that would be my question. My question would be, what is the message to our brokers? Because we want to help our brokers, and we want them to be so smart and be able to see angles that nobody else could see. So if I said to you, you're no longer attorneys, you have all this knowledge, and the only thing that you can do to put food on your table is to sell real estate. So with your knowledge and knowing what you know, what would you do with that information?
So for me it's simple. For me it's simple. I would first I would be proactively looking for sellers. Now if they're not there, and I would be approaching people saying, do you know that your site, your location, your business is eligible for such financing, just to develop the relationship, most important. But let's say I actually do have a potential listing. One of the things that I would want to do and learn is ultimately how many incentives are tied to that particular location. That's important for me, because with that allows me then to leverage that knowledge to figure out which buyers I can target. That's extremely important.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think one of the things that I would be doing as the broker, particularly with the knowledge that I had, is one, either if I go out for lead generation, if I can easily access incentives tied to a piece of dirt and approach folks and open a conversation of, as Roman said, did you realize that you're in a New Market Tax Credit area? And if you're looking to sell this property, that may be a way for a buyer to come in and finance that sale, and you may be leaving something on the table by not knowing that was available to you. If I've got a buyer looking for different locations to buy, then it makes it very easy for me, because if I know where I can where I can steer them in a certain area, if they're interested in new markets, now I know, okay, well, don't bother with these 4 locations, they don't qualify, but these 5 do. So let's refine my search area to these five locations, and now I've got a more targeted focus for my sale.
And I want to point out, like, for example, I had a national chain that said we're going to develop more stores. And what they did was brilliant. They just said, show me on the map where we are with new markets. And they basically said, this is ultimately where we want to be. And it worked even better, because the areas that usually qualify for new markets are also, that was their targeted area. So now you're speaking right away to areas that they are interested in.
Okay.
So that's one thing.
I'm going to interrupt you here a second, because I think you got a wonderful product, but I kind of shy away from selling it. And we have Lou on the show.
Yay!
Lou.
All right.
Why don't you ask your question, Lou, if you would?
Well, thank you, Howard and Michael and Roman and Linda. It's great to be with you out here in California. So thank you for putting this on today. The EB5 program is very productive, and I guess the question is, do you see EB5 program? So thank you again for having me on today.
Yeah, and Lou, after the show, if you would, you know, it might be that you're on a wireless connection or where that problem is. So after the show, this week or next week, you and I will sit down and we'll try to troubleshoot it, because I need to make this as brain dead simple as possible. And it doesn't really, and I'm not suggesting that you're brain dead, but I mean, but what I mean is this, I can't have errors or problems, and so I'm going to be working on that. Why don't we now kind of go to Mike, who hasn't been making been quiet as a church mouse, and so now we're going to be talking about the question of how do you find these incentives, whether it's EB5, and there are other incentives. There's affordable housing incentives and stuff like that. And so now we're going to get to talk a little bit about RAIN ID, because this was developed to help people find the incentives. So, Mike, it's your turn.
All right, thank you, Howard, and thanks for having us on today. I have the RAIN ID at rainid.com. I have the website up, and what I'm going to do is going to walk through a few things about what David and Roman had talked about in regards to areas, for instance, like David was saying earlier about the new market tax credits not available across the street, or maybe you know, available in certain areas. And I'll start by just going to rainid.com and typing in a location, and we have the map. We pride ourselves on that we have one of the most interactive maps, and basically what we took the approach of that RainID at its core is a location intelligence platform, right? So when Roman and I first started doing some research on this, we started off in new markets, and we thought, well, you know what, we can actually branch out. If one of these programs happen to go away, we can actually come in and layer in other types of incentives. And that's exactly what we've done right now. And we'll go through here the incentives that those guys have talked about. Here on the in the Orlando area, what I can show here is that we have inside this the incentives menu here. We have the new market tax credits selection. We can select on that. We can see that these areas here are what is called by the specifications for new markets a severely distressed area. So this one that Orlando is in has we have some stats here like median family income, unemployment, and poverty rate. Those are the main areas that the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the American Community Survey have come up and said, all right, based upon all this data.
Mike, I'm going to interrupt you. You waited all this time just for me to interrupt you.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you this question, and I'm going to want you to show it to me.
All right.
If I'm a broker and someone, and I approach someone about selling their property, I want to find all the incentives for that particular property so that when I go for my interview, I wow them. Show me how I do that.
Okay. There is actually, I'm happy that you asked that because there's one extra piece here. And this is some prototype work right here for the actual reports. 1 second. I should have clicked on my. Let me go back one.
So we know when in doubt, there's always something that's
There's
going to
always something, right? All right. Log in with Twitter. There is a page here that shows that this is actually available for new market tax credits. This is a area that where we will be releasing soon that will show all the individual reports available for that location. If we would like to take a look at what, let me go back to this area on the map.
Yeah, why don't
We can go through these. I'm sorry, Howard.
Why don't I try this question? I'm a broker in Orlando, and I'm looking to market myself to owners of commercial property. And what I want to focus on is those properties where there are all kinds of incentives, because I know the other brokers out there aren't talking about it because they don't know about it.
Right.
How do I identify those properties and then call those owners and say, hey, do you know that we can really get all kinds of incentives here? Were you aware of that?
Well, I'm happy that you asked that. Linda and I teamed up to show exactly that type of feature or the incentives, how a broker would actually implement incentives into their website. And so what Linda and I came up with here, and this is actually a part of our B2B cloud services that will actually allow a broker to plug into to our incentives network. Now, what I showed you a minute ago was just a mapping system. That can be from a research perspective. But now what we can do is we can actually tie the listings themselves to the incentives. For instance, we can take a look at here's a historic bank, historic state bank building that has incentives. This is actually on the broker list. You can take a look at the halves, and this is actually a recent one. This is a historic bank. We can show that it does have incentives here. And then this actually, what this does is this actually attracts buyers, right? And right here off to the left and right hand side, we show that we have incentives here. It's in Madison County, Illinois. It's in the St. Louis metro area. This is a metropolitan area. We have the census tract FIPS, which is actually a subpart of a county. And then we show that this property is eligible for new market tax credits. And from here, we can say, all right, here is the information. There's the tract, and there's all the supporting information.
And so what you're showing there is through the broker list, if you have a listing, you can put your listing. If you're a broker, part of the broker list, and you have a listing, and you put it on the broker list, you also get all of this information with regard to incentives, correct?
That is correct. It's automatic, but it's not limited to just that, right? We know that there are a lot of brokers out there that have their own websites. They actually go to they actually have their in-house inventory. They have their own website. They have their own MLS. They enter the information in themselves. Their systems can tie, just as Linda has here, can tie to our network. It's what is called Application Programming Interface, or API calls. It sounds difficult, but it's actually pretty easy, where their systems can talk to our systems and apply the incentives to their databases.
Well, that's great. The important thing is that this is not available on LoopNet or CoStar, is it?
Not yet.
Aha. So I think that's important, and that's obviously incentive to join the broker list and work with Linda. And I don't want to promote it too much, but really, she's wonderful, and I think the broker list is wonderful. So do you have the ability of showing us, by area, if there's an area in Orlando that I want to work from, and I want to find those properties where there are various incentives? I want to target it by a geographic area.
Yes.
So I know where to look. How do I go about doing that?
Actually, what we can do right here on the broker list, this would be no different than on some other type of search feature. Linda implemented here the incentives, and essentially we can say that we're going to go to Florida. So now we're in a geographic area. And also, I think we can go to...
But I think what he's asking, Mike, is what he's saying is he wants to see the whole area, like on a map. Can he see the whole area and see the visual of it?
Yeah.
And then he can say, okay, in this area, now I want to target this area. So you would do that on your site.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the key.
Thank you, Linda. Yeah.
And
yeah, go to.
That's the point. It's going back to the very rudimentary thought of what we do as professional real estate. Because I have a real estate license as a realtor. Is my farm area correct? So what I do is I go to the map, I find my farm area, I understand my farm area, and then I can identify within this boundary. I now can go and talk to the seller saying, your area qualifies for such and such incentive.
Yes.
Support. But what I do want to point out, it's extremely important, and that since David's here, there's a huge lead opportunity that folks should know about, which ties into the Renity map, is affordable housing projects. We show and display affordable housing projects that are in a position to be sold, to be also recapitalized. And that is a perfect opportunity for lead generation for a commercial broker who is in multifamily, which is a vast majority of your commercial brokers.
But for RainID realm, just to clarify, RainID, it's not Orlando, it's nationwide.
Yes.
Two, you can go to any area either visually or typing in a zip code or what have you, and then within that area, click one of these boxes to show, am I NPC qualified, am I NT, what type of CRA or banking needs are in the area, what type of banks are in the area, along with the affordable housing type complexes in the area on the map. Can you show that, Mike, right now?
Yeah, certainly, David. Thanks for, it was a nice lead in. Okay, for instance, that property that I looked at is actually in this area right here, and this happens to be just outside of St. Louis. And we can show what Dave was talking about here. We can show the low-income housing projects that are in this area. We can see that there's a lot of them.
And there is your opportunity.
And we have some right inside this new market tax credit.
This is just fine.
So
now we're talking dollars and cents. This is what I want. This is really what I wanted to get to, and we have to approach this from the perspective of the buyers, sellers, and brokers. This is, if I were a broker, this is what I want to see. This is the information that I must have. Period.
Right. And this is extremely important, even for example, David. When I came here in the firm, one of the things that we were looking at is a lot of the existing inventory. We're going to be either resold or recapitalized. And as a firm, we were wondering how we were going to position ourselves. But before we even get to that point as attorneys, you have the brokers acting on the transaction, engaging on the sales side. So on more mature properties, you're going to see a lot of turnover of new investors coming into a transaction or a total sale happening. So, and that's important when you look at each one of those listings, or not listings, but each one of those properties are there, you can look at which ones are perfect targets, ones that you should look at and probably consult with, especially if you can find a buyer. That's another great thing. If you've got a buyer who's saying, I'm looking for multifamily, I feel comfortable with it, you can basically now look at the mapping system and say, you know, here's some properties that are going to be sold or are being positioned to be sold in the near future.
By the way, I just, as a quick aside, in the affordable realm, if there is an affordable housing property somewhere between year 10 and year 15 in age, those are prime for what we call recycling. And probably half of our business right now in that LIHTC world, the local housing tax credit world, is being driven by these year 10 to 15 properties that are being sold to new investors, new general partners, or being refinanced again within the program. So,
but how do they know that by your data? Can you show that, Mike? Do they know that by your data?
Yes, they do.
Yes. Let me actually go to one of the properties. We can click on one of the properties. We know that this Washington Avenue Apartments year allocated was 2002, placed in service 2014. So they're up on year 11, right? And we are in the process of working on some LIHTC reports, so you could actually query these projects and filter them and view them however you want to do some research on when these projects are going to be ready for rehab.
So you know when it was placed in service, how long it's been in service, meaning when it was eligible to bring in the tenants, when they can start living there. Then when David said the year 10, year 15, what I would do, and I've told my members at CCIM, I said if I was you and I'm in multifamily, what I would do is I would go to the map and I would start to look at year 8 properties. Once it had been in place in service, and I'm coming year 8, because those are the ones at some point you're going to start to see there's going to be some movement. When David says year 10 and 15, at that point you're going to see a lot of people in the market, but I would be there ahead of time. So I would spend time looking in my farm area again, just like Linda mentioned. I would see what properties are about year 8. I know who the borrower is. I know how many tax credits there were. I know all the necessary information about the particular property.
And to this map, Mike, can you stratify this by year and say, show me every property that's 8 years placed in service, 9, 10, 11? Is that possible?
That is actually a feature, and that's a very good point. That's actually a feature that we are going to put in. We're going through a little bit of a menu modifications. So yes, that is certainly one of the features that we want to be able to filter it. Right now, we only have, like, if it's a 4%, 9%.
People watching here, can you overlay the NMDC areas on what we're looking at right now?
Overlay, yeah, new markets, certainly.
And when it comes to the multifamily,
so anywhere in red is a high distressed area, and investors within the New Market Tax Credit realm would be interested in that area. Yellow qualifies for NMDC, is not necessarily high distress, so you may not get the broader pool of investor interest in that particular area, but very quickly you can look and see, now I've overlapped affordable to say NMDC. I could reduce the affordable to see NMDC only, but pretty quickly I can see if I've got someone coming in town to locate a business, or I even have a client who's interested in buying something or leasing or selling. Very quickly I know, hey, this is NMDC eligible. Add that to the conversation because it's a worthwhile conversation to have.
And one thing really important, if you look at this area, which I was in St. Louis, this is an actual hot area of downtown St. Louis. This is a lot of activities going on. There's a lot of stuff, and this is a lot of the young millennials are moving right in this area. This is one of the best places to be.
Howard, you got a couple good questions posted.
Okay, hold on a second.
You
Thank
got
you,
some-
Linda. I need that. Okay. All right. It's from Mark is what you're
Right.
talking about?
Yes.
Okay. Mark asked the question, I just used Rain ID to evaluate the Mission Viejo area of California, which is right around the corner from where I am, by the way. Literally right around the corner. One of the tracks, 320, is that .14, shows
Yes.
itself as heavily distressed. But when I click on the track report, it doesn't say that it's distressed at all. How can I quickly evaluate the credibility of the existing properties in the tract? Yeah, I used to be a residential, I did some residential brokerage in 2005, 2006, and 2007. And I'm familiar with Mission Viejo, and I could tell you, without going very far, I could tell you what properties those are. Because there's only one area of Mission Viejo that would be distressed. So can you answer that? How can he quickly evaluate the credibility of the existing properties in the tract?
Can you bring that track up, Mike?
Yeah, what is the track number?
320.14.
320. Sorry, hold on one second here. Got to grab the county number. I'm sorry, 32 what?
32014.
Hold on a second. I might have the wrong number here. Here, it's kind of still difficult to do it with the county.
Yeah.
Is that the right number up here?
32014.
.14. 320.
0.14.
0.14. So yeah, that's. That's not in that same county.
Should be 0.14.
Now, yeah, it'll be 0.14, but the FIPS number from the Census Bureau, they don't include the point.
Oh, okay.
So I think we need to do Mission Viejo.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, Mission Viejo. Sorry, hold on.
Well, he obviously sees something there, Mike.
Yep, hold on.
And if what Howard's saying is,
With me?
Go ahead, Linda.
well, you're saying that
I
you
don't
know.
disagree.
If he can give me the whole census tract number, that'd probably help. But let's look right.
Lou, if you can get if you know what the whole census,
Mark.
not Lou, I think Mark.
Mark.
Yeah, Mark.
If just type in Mission Viejo.
I think I just saw 320 there.
There's 320
There it is. There's 1.14.
right there. 320.14 right there. That one.
Yeah, and he said it shows as heavily distressed, but when he clicks on the track report, it doesn't say that it is distressed at all. How can he quickly evaluate the credibility of the existing properties in the tract?
It's qualified distress, right? Okay, these values right here are the same ones on the report, and it does say that it's qualified and severely distressed.
But he's asking, how can he quickly evaluate the credibility? Oh, now he put in a number. He put in a long number, Howard.
I think he actually gave the census tract number. 0605. Is that the same one you're looking at, Mike?
I believe it is. Yeah.
Yeah, Mark just put in 0605903214. That's what you've got
it.
there.
That's the track number.
So
His question is, how do you verify whether or not, what he's looking to do is verify the accuracy of your information.
he said scroll down. He said scroll down. So show us the map again. Data, he said.
Yep.
Okay. Heavily distressed says no. See, it says no there, but the visual is that it is on the upper part.
That might be, there is actually heavily distressed primary and secondary. That might be a secondary criteria. The items here that are in green, we probably need to list this out in the report, that these items here show that obviously the ones that are green are yes, but these were, the census tract is marked as qualified, so it's at least a qualified, but it also, let's see, I need to take an additional look at that because it says severely distressed, which is on, I think, on severely distressed secondary. This piece right here has actually been updated. We may have a small bug in here. So, but according to
Well, I think that's why.
oh, here we go. The tract meets the primary criteria for the New Market Tax Credit Program. It has an unemployment rate of 150% of the national rate or higher at 11.9%. That is the criteria here.
Now, see,
Now,
I don't know if our members would understand that, Mike.
I understand that. This
See, that's what Mark is saying, and that's part of our fear. You know, like, we're all not educated in this, so we don't know how to navigate these screens and navigate the data. So he's showing us, you know, he's a smart guy, and he's trying to make sure he's not going to think something's is what it isn't.
So I think it's important that we give out Mike's phone number. And
hey, you know what? I've been handling calls for quite some time. I certainly invite it.
And wait a second. And what's your residential address, Mike? I want everybody to know where you live.
123 Not Gonna Happen, Howard Lane.
Let me interject about one thing, and this is just the way you probably handle it relatively easy. Is this: if Mike can show that area again, can you put the map live?
Sure.
I want to see that map. Do me a favor. Now, more importantly, the most important is can you show me the banks?
Yep.
And then I want you to show me. This is extremely critical. So these are our bank branches. And which branch is that? For example.
JP Morgan.
Okay, here you go. So if I want to confirm particular data, keep in mind that the banks that are in this area are completely aware of what census tracts qualify for what. So one thing I would typically do is this. I can generate a RAIN ID report, and then I can get in touch with Chase Bank or Bank of America and simply say, I see this site qualifies for New Markets EB5. And typically the banks are more than happy to talk to you because at the end of the day, if they can place capital in those areas and they're in the business of lending money, they're more than happy to work with a broker. Keep in mind, you cannot work in a vacuum in this industry. This industry, you have to be willing to get out of your comfort zone, learn, and more importantly, work with other people in this area, which means I want to talk to the bankers. I want to talk to the investors. I want to be able to approach people and confirm some of the stuff. And that's what I would do is recently I talked to, for example, one of the banks, and they asked me about a specific census tract. So what I did is I sent them a RAIN ID report, and then they received it, and they said, you're right, we look at our data, you look at yours, we're reconciling, we're fine. So that's another way you can confirm the stuff. But you've got to be willing to actually engage and get out there and visit with people.
Guys,
So
I'm going to have to wrap this up. We're kind of going on forever here.
Howard?
And there's been some great information. There is a question here from Rich. Linda, I'll be right with you. Rich asks a question, can this data show trends in the market, such as areas increasing or decreasing in distressed property?
So I would say we have, for example, the last census data, we have that. Because people are more reactionary, meaning they want to be able to pursue a sale right away, they're not looking for historical trends. Now, do we have that? Yes, we do. And ultimately, we can aggregate and show you, for example, year by year, and specifically if you look at TEA areas, back to EB5, when you have an area that qualifies as a TEA in 1 year and the next year may not, we can give you and deliver you that data. But again, the majority of the brokers are looking for food on the plate today. They're not looking for trend lines.
But that's important, though. I mean, I presume, Rich, wants to have a good conversation with his client on this is a great area to be in. We're seeing some distress going away, or maybe if he sees increased distress property, have a different conversation of this one's heading the bad direction, stay away, or maybe come into it for opportunities for investment, right?
I agree with David on that one. As a matter of fact, Mike taught me one thing. He said I should never assume what a user wants to use the data for. So David's right. I don't know, and yes, we can make it available.
And that's why there's support help.
That's right.
I think.
Howard, Rich had another question. He asked if they had 6B tax incentives. Now, I think that's a state thing in Illinois. Am I right, Rich? Are you talking about a state incentive? 6B tax incentives, Roman.
Does anybody know what those are?
I believe that's a state incentive.
Yeah, I wonder I wonder if that's state incentive of Illinois. I don't know.
So your incentives don't show states, just what?
No, that's not true.
Well, let me interject here. The data that we have collected have come from a number of different sources. One from the Census Bureau, the American Community Survey, which is at the national level, as well as the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Okay, so as RAIN ID grows and our community grows, we will be able to get into state-specific things. But you have to realize that a lot of this data is at the federal level. So that's why we have national coverage. Now, as we grow, we'll get down to the state level and eventually down to the county and municipality. So a lot of those data systems are different, and they vary, and so on and so forth. They're not under a rule standard, but we are starting to look at some other programs at the state level.
I just looked it up, and it is a county in Illinois. It's a county incentive, so that's the reason it's not on the map, Rich.
All right, now let me add something. Because our first inaugural show here has had all kinds of little glitches, and we somehow or another are pretty much getting through it. Now, a lot of things that I'd like to change. I'd like my camera angle to be a little bit different, and a few other things, and a little and maybe some makeup on because I'm shy.
You're looking good, Howard. Looking good.
Very
Thank you,
good.
Lou. But the point that I wanted, for people who don't really understand the process of creating these online and technology services, it's an ongoing process. It's like a human being. We don't start out perfect, and we usually don't end up perfect. As a matter of fact, I think I've gone in reverse. But the point is, hopefully we're moving in the right direction, and what is available this moment will probably be much better a month from now and 2 months from now.
That's right.
Now, I would like to kind of start wrapping up the show, and I'd like to add a couple of comments. One, I see a conundrum. First, it was difficult for me to get the word out of my mouth, but I did. That's number one. Number two, having to do with the conundrum, it would seem to me that David and Roman and Michael and Linda, they don't want, or they want everybody out there to go, you really need this. And RAIN ID should be hooked up to LoopNet and every other listing service out there so that this information is available to every broker. Now, the real conundrum is that every broker who has access to this information doesn't want anybody else to know about it. So I don't know how you're going to spread the word, but if I was a broker, I'd be the only, I would want it to be that I'm the only one in my area. Bye, Lou.
Bye, Lou.
I would want it to be that I'm the only one in the area that knows about this information so that I can impress people much more with the tremendous information that I have. So there's nothing else to say on that, guys.
Well, getting back about your big bold statement here is that the investors or developers are looking for properties or are going to gravitate toward real estate listing sites that have incentives.
Right.
And I'm
not criticizing you at all. because I really
I don't think you
want
are.
this, and really the rest of the brokerage world should want this too.
Yeah, and I think, Howard, just my 2 cents of it all is this, that I understand your thoughts, and I agree with it, what you're saying. But I'll tell you, the incentive business is bigger than you can ever imagine. It's a huge industry. Currently, Rain ID shows $40 billion in real estate incentives a year, and we're growing. And meaning that if I'm one broker, I'm going to be specializing particularly, like, for example, in one area. I mean, it's great to show these other incentives, but you're going to pair up. The person who's going to know really well how regional centers work, the EB5, is not going to be necessarily the person who's going to do a lot of new markets or LIHTC. And, for example, how to deal with impact fee waivers. And, for example, I'm also doing currently a lot of VA transactions. And each one requires an own specialty. So even as you try to hoard it, it's just too big to hoard.
Roman, you take my comments too seriously. Of course I'd want to hoard it, but the reality is, you know, if you want to tell the whole world, that's fine, but come to me. If I'm a broker, come to me first, and I'll tell you who to give it to. But I say that mostly in jest. The brokerage world should want all of this, and right now the rest of the brokerage world doesn't want all of this, so all of the brokers out there should be signing up with TBL, the broker list, so that you'll have access to it.
Yeah.
Now,
I want to point out one thing before we sign off. You know, I'm working with one particular CCIM member who's become very mindful of the incentives. And I sent you an email today where he's always come to me and said, I'm trying to find incentives tied to site. That's all he ever does. Now, he does other things too, but he always tries to figure out what incentives are tied to location. And right as we speak, this person might have figured out how to score a 10,000 acre property for incentive financing. He just got the attention of the landowner, and imagine the commission check, because he was diligent. He stayed on it and he cared enough to know. So I applaud that CCIM member, and it speaks volumes of that effort.
you are out of your mind if you're a broker and you don't have this information, you don't try to get it. You're out of your mind. So that is my wrap-up of the most important takeaway that I've got. That's how I started, and that's how I ended. Now, David, why don't I go to you and ask you to wrap it up with what your most important takeaway is from this lengthy show that I'm sure Alan Buchanan is going to complain about because it's too long.
I think it certainly would be this, is that when you hear about the next big thing, it's the people who join the show to take the time to learn what's really there, because I assure you a number of folks will be hearing EB5 and spinning a lot of wheels on it because they didn't do the research behind it to figure out what it really meant and how it applied. I applaud you, Howard, for the show. I think you did a great job on it. The people that sat through an hour and a half with me, thank you. I appreciate that. And I can assure you that the Rain ID product will morph, will grow, and the better information you can show, the better every one of this presentation is going to end up doing.
Roman, your wrap-up.
I think if you don't understand the incentive business, I think it's something you should look at because you're leaving a lot of opportunities, a lot of money on the table.
Linda, since you're on there, well, we didn't have a chance to tell Lou, but Linda, since you're on there, why don't you give us your 2 cents?
I just say thanks for presenting it, and I learned something new today myself, and I appreciate all the participation of the audience and Rain ID for teaching all of us. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I want to let everybody know before I wrap things up, we will continue, like Rain ID, we will continue to improve the product that we're providing. I really am, despite all of the little mistakes and the fact that my intro that I really was kind of proud of didn't work out all that well. It will in the next version. I'm doing a show on July 1st where I'm actually just going to be, it's going to be a coffee clutch. It's going to be a chit-chat on commercial real estate. I've got a long list of items that I can, I've got a long list of items that I can talk about, some legal, some real estate, some hopefully a little bit funny, and that I'm going to invite people to please come on, let's just talk. It's going to be no more than an hour. I'm going to cut them off, and myself, and it's going to be a fun show. It'll be at 11 a.m. on July 1st, and we're going to try to do a weekly show. Some of it will be presenting a little bit more information. I have quite a few other shows already lined up, including I'm talking with people from Healthy Buildings. This is one of my favorite topics. It's not just about sustainability, it's about the healthiness, creating buildings and environments where the employees are healthy. And it's going to be a huge savings to people if we're able to do that. So with that being said,
Great show, Howard.
I'd like to thank Linda. I'd like to thank my guest, Mike. Mike, you just have never looked better than you do today.
Excellent. Hey, I've got the face for radio, man. Let me tell you.
You got the face for radio. You know that I've heard that before. David, I really appreciate the fact that you joined us here. And Roman, as usual, you did a great job. And everybody, hope to see you next week. You take care, and we'll be divvying up this into an audio and various video casts. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.